So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today as we bring you the latest grape and wine industry research through our COVI lecture series. We're very lucky today because we have two for the price of one with our speakers. Our colleagues came all the way from Summerland, British Columbia, from the beautiful Okanagan, to share with us their research. So this afternoon, we've got a double presentation of two of our COVI professional affiliates from the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada Centre in Summerland, British Columbia. So we've got Pat Bowen and Karl Bogdanoff. As a research scientist, Pat leads a program in grapevine physiology with a focus on sustainable viticulture. Excuse me. Using drone imaging, sensor networks, and GIS tools, she develops precision management techniques that improve fruit quality and vineyard health. She's constructed an extensive GIS library map for BC, which we are very envious of here in Ontario, that has served in characterizing local terroirs and defining sub-appellations for the Okanagan Valley. Karl Bogdanoff is a viticulture biologist and is focusing his research on the climatic and cultural factors that influence grapevine winter hardiness. He develops strategies to reduce vineyard freeze damage and is building a model to predict grapevine hardiness in Okanagan Valley vineyards. In collaborative research, he's determining the effect of leaf roll and red blotch virus diseases on grapevine physiology and wine quality. So please join me today in welcoming Pat and Karl, and I think we'll get started with Pat's portion of the talk. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for that very sweet introduction. We're really happy to be back out here to speak to you. We haven't been here for a while, which we feel badly about, but it's nice to be here and to catch up with our colleagues here. We have a number of collaborations here with the researchers at COVI, and that's been a great thing for us. So Karl and I are going to talk about a couple of problem issues that we have in common between BC and here in the Niagara. One being leaf roll virus, which is everywhere. We have a big problem with it in BC as well. And then cold hardiness. So leaf roll, we've been working on leaf roll since about 2013 when Sid was with us for a while at the Research Center in Summerland. So he did a lot of this work. There are you see many authors there because this is kind of a simple project that we did, but a number of people kind of pitched in and did their part and lent their expertise to it. So, and it was a simple question too. So in order to develop a strategy for dealing with leaf roll, we pretty much end up having to pull all the vines. And it's important in developing that timing to understand what the real impacts of leaf roll are on the vine. So basically that's what this project was, looking at impacts of fruit production, vegetative vigor and growth, photosynthesis or the performance of the leaf canopy, fruit quality, maturation and composition, pretty much everything here, wine quality, aroma, flavor, mouthfeel, color, and then vine cold hardiness. So you can see why we had all these different researchers involved. So the experiment was with Cabernet Franc, which I know you produce very nice Cabernet Francs here as well, so I thought this would be extra relevant. And we did the work over 4 years, from 2013 to 16. We actually extended it into 17 for a 5-year, but I'm just going to present on these results. We haven't tasted those 17 wines yet. And the conditions among the years were very different. So 2013 and 16 were kind of normal years for growing degree days, so just a little bit more than 1,600. 2014 was a warm year with 1,700, and 2015 was a record warm year. Very, very hot. So that affected our results. So what we did, and Sid was heavily involved in setting this experiment up, is go into the vineyard, and we had infected vines interspersed with mostly clean vines. So what I've shown here is a row of vines, and when we found an infected vine by testing, if it was surrounded by clean vines, that would become a block. So we would select a clean vine 2 vines away and then a spare on the other side. because in case we got infection during the experiment. So we had 20 of those replicate blocks, like the 3 shown here. So an infected and then 2 flanking healthy vines, and the infection was confirmed each year with ELISA or PCR by SIR. So measured on each vine, and I went through this before, yield in its components, pruning mass to look at vigor, leaf gas exchange, looking at photosynthesis, bud cold hardiness, fruit composition, and then wine quality. And we made wines, we didn't make wine in 2013, but in 14, 15, and 16. Okay, I want to start with the results for leaf gas exchange because they seem to have, this seems to be the key to what we're seeing in terms of impact, is what leaf roll does to the performance of the leaf canopy. So we have a clean vine here, and you see these nice green leaves, and this is what the canopy of a leaf roll infected vine looks like, but not until around veraison and after it starts to pick up these symptoms. So we measured leaf gas exchange from the beginning of the season. We never saw any differences between the leaves in terms of photosynthesis or stomatal conduction. They were pretty much the same. As soon as we started seeing symptoms showing up around veraison, we started to pick up differences. So you see in this first row, this is for the non-infected or clean vine, it's green, and then we also measured photosynthesis on green leaves on the infected vine, and we didn't really see any difference in the photosynthesis. But when we went to mottled leaves, so they're starting to show that little bit of red color, photosynthesis was reduced by 40%. So we know that 60% of the sugar production, and then these very red leaves, only 30% of the sugar production. So you can see what a number this does. It's really damaging the ability of these leaves to make sugar. So you get all the shade from the leaves, but you don't get any sugar. Well, you only get about half the sugar per vine, you estimate it. So that kind of explains when we see these other results. So if we look at yield and its components, so here we have the pairs of bars are for the 4 different years, and the red is always for leaf roll and the green is for clean. We didn't see any impacts on the yield components or yield, clusters per vine, berries per cluster. We got a little reduction in the last year, and berry mass we actually picked up a bit of a little bit of increase, but nothing really there. We didn't find any impacts on pruning mass or crop flow. And this is because most of these things are set before veraison, so that wasn't surprising. But when we looked at basic juice composition in the fall at harvest time, we found a consistent reduction in soluble solids or bricks over the 4 years, a little bit of increase in titratable acidity, showing these berries are just not as mature. There's the indication, and then very similar pH. So the soluble solids was decreased on average by 1.2 bricks. And if you think about Cabernet Franc and where you're growing it, if you're a grower, you know, is it 26 bricks or 25 bricks? You'd rather have than 26 bricks. It seems like a little different, but it can make all the difference in the world in terms of the money you make and what you see to be the maturation of your fruit. Some surprises here. If we looked at skin composition, these are phenolics on a dry weight. So we peeled the berries, and then we look at the concentration of these components on a dry mass basis. So we did really pick up very much, but I want to point out something here is look how variable these are among years. The conditions, the growing conditions in the year can really affect these, but we found very little effect on them. In 1 year, 2014, we found reductions in tartaric acid esters, flavanols, and anthocyanin. But if you look across, this one's the one that's the most effective, the most different in terms of what leaf roll can do. We found these reductions. It's not in this 1 year, but keep in mind this is on a concentration on dry skin, not on the mass you throw into the tank. So you see this lots of condensed tannins in that very hot year. And the same thing for seed. We see differences among years, but very little impacts on that concentration on a dry mass basis. Now if you look at the fresh mass, so this is how much, say, anthocyanin concentration there is in that fruit going into the tank, you see this consistent impact among the years. Okay, about 11% reduction in anthocyanin going into the tank. Some reductions in seed tannins and in total tannin reflecting the effects on seed. And then you see bigger differences among the years. So this is the one that seems to be impacted the most, anthocyanins going into the tank. So we made wines. Karl made wines. I shouldn't say we made wines. Karl made these wines. And for the first 2 years, we followed the experimental design. So we had 20 blocks. We chose 10 at random, and then made a wine from a clean vine, one clean vine, and one infected vine for each of the blocks. So then we started seeing some of our results, we're just looking at fruit maturation differences. Are we attributing the impacts of leaf roll onto fruit quality just because there's differences in maturation? So we decided to have a look at that in a more controlled way. So in 2016, we made single line vines again, but from 6 pairs of infected, clean, that had similar soluble salts, as close as we could find for those vines, so they were picked in terms of their fruit maturation. So there's a 1.4 liters per a wine per vine, and we made them in these coffee flasks. They make really nice wine because you can use the plunger to hold the cap down, and so everything gets extracted nice and evenly. They're stirred every day, and then I won't go through this normal commercial winemaking practices, as normal as you can get in a coffee flask. So looking at, okay, just to show you the difference in the kind of fruit that's going into these flasks in terms of maturation. So 2014, the must-soluble solids range between about 26 Brix, which is what we consider ripe and mature for Cabernet Franc, all the way up to almost 29 Brix. So we went from mature to very mature. In 2015, which was a record hot year, it's almost embarrassing to see this, but they were from very mature, so 27, all the way up to 30.7. Now, that's a lot of sugar. A lot of that would have to be dehydration to get those levels. So we're really talking about everything was really mature. And then in 2016, where we paired the vines based on maturation. So we started with a pair close to 24 Brix, which would be on the low side. We would, if you had to pick a perfect soluble solids, it would be 26. So there's on the low side, all the way up to very mature, about 28 Brix. And that affected the results. So we're looking at wine constituents. So we were first looking at anthocyanin because that was affected most in the berry, and we found that I won't call it say red blotch all the time, leaf roll, because I've been working on red blotch day. The leaf roll, we found the wines had 7% less anthocyanin. But when we looked at how maturity plays a role, we can see there's a strong correlation there. So are we looking at just a maturity effect, or is there this direct impact on anthocyanin production? Because we don't know whether these vines that produce these ones would have become these if they were left on the vine longer. And conversely, whether these would have been down here at an earlier stage of maturation. So there's some confounding. So definitely we're looking at this delay in maturation. In that very hot year, so here's part of our answer maybe, when everything is super ripe, that 2015, the anthocyanins are very similar. We don't see that. But look at, we're going from, more than 27, 28 on average up to, well, the maximum is almost 31 there. So this is really ripe. So maybe we have our answer, but we're really not sure what happens down at 26 Brix, where most of the fruit we'd like to be. Maybe they separate here. So this is why we did this controlled pairing, and lo and behold, we found when they're very mature, or 27 Brix, they're the same. But when we go back and find these less mature fruit batches, they become different. So if you're in a heat-shy area and you're picking your Franc at 24 or 25 Brix, if you have leaf roll, at least we would expect then to have lower amounts of color in that fruit, which is not good. There's lots of areas in the Okanagan Valley where, one of them in our backyard, where we get it to 25 Brix and we're feeling good about our Franc, and if we had leaf roll, we should be concerned. And then that's just the color. Okay. So this is some sensory results, and I know this isn't the best way to present them. I've got some PCH charts, but I just wanted to point out a couple of things here, just to show you what we're rating intensity of. So we had 10 judges, and pretty much the same ones every year that tasted these wines blindly and then rated the intensity of these characteristics. So we had for aroma, we had red, black, and cooked fruit aromas and vegetative. And then for flavors, the same red, black, and cooked fruit, vegetative flavor. And then for mouthfeel, body, astringency, and aftertaste. And you can see in 2014 where we had differences in maturity from mature up to very mature, that range, we see these reductions in black fruit flavor, an increase in vegetative flavor, and a decrease in body and a decrease in aftertaste. So obviously the wines are not as good in quality as the ones with leaf roll. In 2015, where all the fruit got really ripe, everything was really ripe, we found no effect on the individual components, except for this one, a slight decrease in red fruit aroma. In 2016, where we had it controlled for maturation, we found no effect again. So maturation, it's really doing a number on it. If you go back to what I said about the canopy performance, it's just really not getting the sugar. The fruit isn't getting the sugar it needs to ripen. That's what it looks like from this. Okay, so here's the better way to look at the wine quality. Now I loaded everything in here. So on this chart, we also have some wine chemistry, and I know you can't make out what this is because I can barely see it and mine isn't blurry. So I put some of the main ones in larger font so you can see them. So again, the green is for the clean, the red is infected vine fruit, and you can see there's a bit of overlap here. 2 of the infected vine's fruit is lying within the population's territory for the clean wines. But mostly we find on the right side, we're finding those clean wines have more body, aftertaste, black fruit flavor, and aroma, and anthocyanin. So there's the color. And then the leaf roll infected vines are producing wines with light color. They're kind of really pale, and they're also more vegetative in their aroma. So a lot of this have to do with maturation here. Okay, so when we go to the very, very, very ripe year, we still see some separation here. So I'll put those main components here, and we see that more than half of the wine, so this would be 5 out of 9 that we included in the chart here, lie outside the population for the leaf roll wines. So they have more black fruit and cooked fruit, that your cooked fruit with the body, astringency, and aftertaste. And a number of these leaf roll wines are in that territory, but we do see some of them outside. So they have less of what's listed here and more red fruit. So they're lighter, sort of fresher fruit tasting wines. And they also, some of them have a very light color. They're very pale. So even though all the fruit is really ripe and the individual components we couldn't pick up, but when you look at it like this, you can see there are some concerns still, even when you get that leaf roll infected vines blowing. Then finally, where we controlled everything really well, we see a lot more overlap here, and we expected that because we're pairing everything up, but there's just one outlier here where it is very, very light color. Okay, but most of them lie within that territory of the wines. So we're still thinking maturation is most of it, but then you have these other problems as well. There seems to be some direct effect on certain things being produced in the berries. So this is my last slide and makes a segue to Karl's talking about bud hardiness. So we measured bud hardiness each winter during the acclimation phase in early November, then in peak hardiness in beginning of January, and then deacclimation in late March. And the good news is, and in 2 of the years, we couldn't detect any differences. And this is also pretty good news because even when we did detect an effect, which was during the acclimation phase, it wasn't very big. So 0.4 degrees in November in 2014 and 0.3 degrees. So these are pretty similar. Now, Sid knows we've just been looking at the data from Red Blotch. And everything is way different. It's a really different virus, and it really impacts grape hardiness. So the good thing with red blotch is it doesn't, at least where we are, it's not spreading, so you yank those things out. But it's one of the few things that we found can actually affect hardiness within a cultivar. AVA does, and some things do a little bit, but it has a big effect on hardiness. Very different from this. Okay, so I told you there were 6 scientists involved in this, and there were even more technicians. So they do most of the work, and we have really fantastic technicians at our center. This is Brad Estegard, who's measuring photosynthesis. So I want to acknowledge them, but also the BC Wine Grape Council, the industry that provided funding, and also these vineyards that have virus issues that allow us to go in and keep their infected vines in the ground for a while so we can study them. And Sid knows they're very nice to us and allowing us in to do this work. So I want to acknowledge them too. So that's it for me.
All right. Good, I have some time. So I'm going to talk about varietal differences in grapevine hardiness, and I want to break this down into buds, canes, and roots, because different grapevine structures have different tolerances to cold temperatures. And this picture here is a good example of winter bud injury in this vineyard. The picture was taken to spring 2009, and in the previous winter it got down to minus 21 degrees here, and in this little frost pocket here, it got down to a little colder, much colder than that, and there was, in the springtime, very poor bud break and almost 100% crop loss. This is another example of winter injury here. And so in both cases, in these 2 pictures here, there is no bud damage from cold temperatures, yet the vine's vascular system has been severely compromised in the previous winter. And so on the top left here, you have vine collapse. These are 3-year-old Shiraz. And then the bottom right, I suppose, is stunted delayed shoot growth. And it's not the best picture in the world, but you can see on that cane, every bud is pushed. But by May 24th, those should be shoots that are like 30 to 50 centimeters long, and they're not. So for us, we really started ramping up our bud hardiness research when we acquired 2 programmable freezers in 2011, and then with the help of Brock University and the Technical Services Department, we put together 2 bud hardiness testing systems, and that really increased the number of buds we could test on a day. And so with that new capability, one of the first things we decided to do was test the varietal bud hardiness of the major wine grape varieties in the Okanagan Valley. So in 2012-13, we tested 11 varieties and we collected samples from 36 sites. And now we're up to 15 varieties and we're collecting samples from 71 sites. Quickly go to the sampling protocol here. We select sites and vines to be sampled. There's 6 vines per site, and we do that before leaf fall. Then every 2 weeks, from November 1st to April 1st, we sample 3 canes per site. Then we determine hardness with differential thermal analysis on 5. These are excised buds per cane, so it's always buds 3 through 7. And then we post the hardiness to growers within 2 days of sampling. And then this table here is a snippet of a table for the data we send to growers, and it has the location from where we sampled the buds, and then the variety, and also the average LTE 50, which is the same as the mean bud mortality temperature of 15 buds from the 3 canes we sampled per site. So now we've been doing this since 2012, so if I plot this data and put it all together for 5 years here, 12 to 17, you get this nice U-shaped curve here, and it can be divided up into 3 sections. And so as you probably all know, there's acclimation, which is their bud hardiness increases as winter or fall temperatures decrease. There's a period of maximum hardiness, which is usually December, January, and February, and then as temperatures warm, the buds begin to deacclimate and lose their hardiness. On the right is the list of varieties that we started with. There's 11 there. And they're sort of ordered from least hardy down to most hardy, which is Chardonnay. Now, of course, as the season progresses, that ranking of hardiness changes. And so this is sort of a table of relative bud hardiness here. And the data is listed as relative bud hardiness because I have to do that so I can combine data from different sampling days. So for example, during the acclimation period here, I combine the data from 3 sample days. It would be mid-November, or late October, mid-November, and late November. And you can see that there's a 2.8 degree difference in hardiness between the most hardy variety, Pinot Blanc down here, and Shiraz, which is the least hardy variety. But now if you look at this hardiness across the whole season, it looks like Shiraz and Merlot are the least hardy varieties of this group of varieties. Pinot Blanc and Riesling are the most hardy. And I also put Chardonnay, highlighted that because it's a little bit unusual. It starts out very hardy, but it also deacclimates very quickly in the springtime. That's because it breaks bud fairly quickly. Now, I want to talk about this data, and I get it from Washington State University. And if you just Google WSU, grapefruit hardiness, you'll get this table here. They also do bud hardiness, and they have a collection of vines. There it is here in blue. And they test those every 2 weeks also. So why I want to talk about this table is because they present their data as a bud 10, bud 50, bud 90, and Phloem 10 and Xylem 10. So their bud 50 is the same as our LTE 50, and in our case, those two temperatures are very close because we have very similar climates. But the reason I want to talk about this table is because they put a Phloem 10 and a Xylem 10 up there. And what they do is when they're testing hardiness, they test little pieces of canes. And so they can give you a Phloem 10 data, which means there's 10% Phloem damage, and Xylem 10 is the same, 10% Xylem damage. And then if you notice, like Phloem, from this table here, is about 5.6 degrees less hardy than buds. That's simply Phloem minus buds, bud 10. And Xylem is about just as hardy or a little bit hardier than buds. So from the next 5 or so slides, I'm going to talk about Phloem hardiness because it's the more vulnerable of the two tissues here. Again, if I plot this data over 5 years, you get these nice curves here. And there's some similarities and differences with Phloem hardiness and bud hardiness. So Riesling is the hardest wood of the gang here. And also, there's just 8 varieties here. Those are the common varieties between Washington and us, and we sampled bud hardiness. And Chardonnay is also very similar to its bud hardiness curve in that the wood loses its hardiness relatively quickly in the springtime. But what's different about this chart is Sauv Blanc, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Gris now have wood that's less hardy than Shiraz, Merlot, and Capso. So I put a little bit of this data into a table form here. And so what's highlighted here is just Phloem hardiness relative to bud hardiness, and it's simply bud 50 minus Phloem 10, and there's quite a range. They separate out statistically for varieties here. So Phloem appears to be much less tolerant to cold temperatures than buds. Varietal ranking of buds and Phloem hardiness are dissimilar. Phloem hardiness is somewhat unrelated to bud hardiness. And for overall cold tolerance, Sauvignon Blanc, maybe when you think about the wood involved here, might be just as vulnerable to cold temperatures as Shiraz. There's the ranking. Now I want to talk about this top bullet here, because phloem appears to be much less tolerant than cold temperatures in buds. Because I get a lot of questions from growers about this. Is this really true? Like, is phloem super vulnerable to cold temperatures? And I thought, I'm not sure about that. So I wanted to check this out and look at this issue a little more closely. And so to do that, I need to come up with a scale, a way to rate phloem damage. And so this is kind of easier said than done, because buds, they're discrete little organs. And when you expose a bud to cold temperatures, it's either kill or not kill. Phloem, on the other hand, is a system that runs from root tip all the way to shoot tip. And so the question is, how do you kind of quantify where, or how do you quantify phloem damage? So kind of tackle this issue. We went out, collected a bunch of canes, threw them into a freezer. That was a big walk-in freezer. And we set the temperature to decrease at 2 degrees per hour. And then we took canes out when they're minus 16 degrees, and more canes out when it's minus 18. So every hour until minus 28, and all the canes are taken out of the freezer then. And then we put those canes in a plastic bag, let them sit at room temperature for 6 days, and then we cross-section them. And so this is what you get when you do a cross-section of your canes. And also when we collected those canes, it was the bud hardiness was minus 23.7, so they're fairly hardy, the canes were also. So these are cross-sections, a little bit of anatomy lesson here. This is your pith. This is your xylem tissue here, light green, fairly thick ring. This is your phloem tissue, the dark green ring on the outside of the light green ring, and then on the very outside is your periderm. Now, to rate phloem damage, at minus 16, everything's green, and so that we developed a scale that there's no damage there, and so there's no phloem damage. At minus 20, there's a little bit of phloem damage here, circled here, and so that got a rating scale of 1, say, and that's about 10% damage. At minus 24, the canes, it's mostly the phloem of the canes mostly damaged here. And there is some viable phloem tissue here, and then I got a rating scale of a 3. And then at minus 28, the phloem's been killed all the way around, and the xylem also has been severely damaged. So with assessing cold temperature injury to phloem tissue, we now have an idea how to do this. So I designed 2 experiments. One experiment, we exposed canes to steadily decreasing temperatures, and experiment 2, we exposed some canes to constant temperatures, minus 18 degrees. That's a very cold temperature, but it was about 4 degrees warmer than the LTE 50. And if you go through this flow chart here, experiment 1, we collected 156 canes, divided them up into 12 bundles of 13 canes, put them in our large walk-in freezer. That decreased at 2 degrees per hour. And then we removed canes at minus 3, then minus 12, minus 17 degrees, and then every half hour we took out a bundle of canes. And then the last bundle came out at minus 28 degrees. And once all the canes were out of the freezer, we divided them into 2 groups. One group had 8 canes, and we assessed those for bud and phloem damage about a week later. And then the other group had 5 canes, and we just rid those in water. And then we scored those for bud break, shoot, and root growth. And in the second experiment here is very similar, except the freezer regime is a little bit different. Again, the freezer temperature is cooled to about at 2 degrees per hour until it got to minus 18. And then we held the temperature constant, minus 18 for 24 hours. So here we moved canes at minus 30, and then at minus 16, and then at minus 18. And then once the freezer temperature was constant, minus 18, we moved the next bunch out at 1 hour, 2, 4, 8, and 24 hours of exposure at minus 18 degrees. And again, we divide those into 2 groups and tested it the same way as we did in experiment 1. So results from experiment 1 and scoring and how we score buds and canes. To score buds, we just simply cut off the top half of the bud and then just record the number of primary, secondary, tertiary buds that have been killed. And then then we take that and then we cross-section these canes 16 times, and then we just simply record the percent phloem damage there was. So in this first table here, we look at the comparison of primary bud mortality as determined by standard DTA versus that by visual inspection. And here you can see, and this is also the average of 7 test runs here when we ran this experiment. And so the average LTE was minus 21.2, and you can see the actual bud death was actually at minus 22.5, and the difference here is at minus 1.3. So actually, the buds are a little bit harder than what we report them to be. The relationship of phloem injury, 2% reduction in normal shoot and root growth for canes rooted in water. And you can see here, here's our little rating scale. Here's the corresponding percent damage to phloem. And if you look at the temperatures here, you can see they're pretty similar to what buds, what the standard bud hardiness is. And so phloem actually is almost as hardy as buds. And also what's interesting here is, again, at 50% bud damage, we're at minus 23.5. We're at minus 23.5 degrees as the temperature, and that's about 1.2 degrees hardier than the average bud 50. Let's go backwards here. So anyway, this is actually a really good thing. Actually, buds are a little bit hardier than what we report them to be. And also, phloem is much harder than we thought it was, but it also can withstand a fairly substantial amount of damage before we get a reduction in early shoot growth. So a lot of this good news, there's a catch, and then here comes sort of the opposite bad news story here. So experiment 2 with a constant temperature exposure, minus 18 degrees. So bud and phloem mortality for Merlot canes exposed to a constant non-lethal cold temperature. And it's about, again, this is the average of 4 test runs here, and the average LTE of those 4 is minus 22.7. So initial bud and phloem damage prior to sampling canes averaged 5 and 13% respectively. And here's the interesting at minus 18 for 8 hours, bud damage averaged 29%, which is right here, and phloem damage averaged 90%, way up here. So the duration of constant non-lethal cold temperature has a greater effect on phloem tissue than buds. And so in situations where you have an Arctic outflow or this polar vortex you guys have been experiencing, the temperatures, the prolonged cold temperatures that aren't quite, they're sub-bud lethal, actually can do a lot of damage to phloem tissue, and the buds could still be viable. So now I'll switch gears really quickly here and talk a little bit about roots. So roots in the literature are reported to be not very hardy. And also, we know in Canada, soil freezes every winter, and how cold that soil, how deep that frozen layer becomes really depends on how severe your winter temperatures are. It also depends on soil type, soil moisture, and probably a really important one is the snow cover. So in a situation where you have Arctic outflow or some really cold temperatures, or if your vines are planted on a hilltop it's kind of wind-blown and has very poor snow cover, those situations, your roots are fairly vulnerable to cold temperatures. So this is just a simple little, I want to know, like, what happens to roots when you freeze them? Or what happens to the vine when you freeze roots? And so I took some potted vines, put them in our walk-in freezer again, and then pulled them out at different temperatures. I had 24 hours exposure. And then I took those vines and put them in the greenhouse and see if, looked at them every couple of days. And after 2 months, they kind of look like this. So at -5 and -8 degrees, we had normal shoot and root growth. At -11, we had delayed bud break, slowed shoot growth, few surviving old roots and new roots that mostly originate from rootstock wood. And then at -14, we had delayed bud break, almost no shoot growth. Old roots were all killed, and there were no new roots. And so when we looked at all these things, we pulled the vines up and looked at the roots and stuff. But if we kept these, this vine would have died at -14. And this vine probably would have survived, but it would have been severely stunted for that growing season. So this is an experiment we're working on right now. And so it's root hardiness from Merlot, self-rooted Merlot. We can do that in BC. I also do that in Washington. Phylloxera not a big issue there. And then we also looked at Merlot and rootstock combination here. So here's our Merlot, and then this is 110R on Merlot. The other rootstocks are Ramsey, SO4, 5C, Repere Gawar, Schwarzman, 39, 3309C, and 10114. This here just attributes the rootstocks here. And so to do this experiment, we made a bunch of bunch graphs last spring. We planted them out in July 16th. And planted the vines in a single row nursery, and they're spaced just 27 centimeters apart. Treatments were replicated in 4 blocks of 6 subsample vines per plot. So basically, we planted 216 vines in a single row. And then single vines were dug out for hardiness testing November 13th, November 27th, December 12th, and we're going to be digging up a couple more shortly here as soon as we get back. And I just wanted to show you the results just from the December 12th when we dug them up here. And here you can see that the rootstocks actually have a level of hardiness, and they separate out really nicely here. So these temperatures here are the root 90s, so it's fairly severe root damage. When we dig them up, and we can actually look at the roots, and we can test these roots in our freezer again with IR sensors. And these are the numbers we get for hardiness values. So roots of Merlot are less hardy than rootstock roots. Of the rootstock roots, 10114 is the hardiest, 110R was the least hardy. And then root hardiness of rootstock appears to correlate with a rootstock vigor effect. So these rootstocks down here are pretty devigorating rootstocks, and they tend to have hardier roots. Now we also did one other lesson here. We also looked at buds, the scion buds, from the same experiment. And here are the 3 sample dates here. And you can see that during acclimation, the rootstocks enhance the hardiness of the scion buds. And then in December 12th, this is down and getting towards the period of maximum hardiness, and you lose that effect. But for us, during acclimation, this is a nice thing to have here. So rootstocks appear to initiate and improve scion bud hardiness during the acclimation period of winter dormancy. Scion buds reach maximum hardiness sooner and grafted to most rootstocks. There was no difference in bud hardiness between rooted Merlot and Merlot 110R. And Merlot bud hardiness was most improved when grafted on Repere Gawar. And just to make a point that this wasn't just a one-off year, we actually saw these same results a couple of years back when we had a rootstock drought. And so during the autumn acclimation period in November 2013 and 14, grafted Merlot, the scions were 2.7 degrees hardier than the buds of unrooted Merlot. And then this other thing to sort of point out here is that in February 2014, the temperature dipped to -21.5, and all the below buds were killed. So the rootstocks actually did work. So I want to make a summary here, just a strategy for minimizing the winter injury, and obviously use hardier varieties and rootstocks in areas prone to colder temperatures. And this is just a summarization of the results here. Riesling is the most cold-tolerant variety of the 11 Vitis vinifera varieties that were tested. Other cold-tolerant white wine grape varieties are Pinot Gris and Pinot Blanc. Chardonnay is also very cold-tolerant, but breaks better early and may be susceptible to spring frost. Pinot Noir and Cabernet Franc are the most cold-tolerant of the red wine grape cultivars tested. Riesling and Chardonnay appear to have hardier wood than Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Gris. Roots of devigorating rootstocks are hardier than roots on non-devigorating rootstocks. And roots of 10114, Riparian Noir, Schwarzman, and 3309C are hardier than 110R and Ramsey rootstocks. And then roots enhance bud hardiness of young vines. And this is my last slide here. Just to sort of end on a positive note, these are the annual minimum temperatures from Vineland, Ontario over the last 50 or so years. And if you draw a trend line through all those minimum temperatures, you can see things aren't as cold as they used to be. And so not all things about global warming are bad, it looks like. And with that, I'd like to acknowledge Brad Estinger, our technician, Steve Marsh, and Manuel and Al Brownlee, all great technicians. Mission Hill Family Estate Winery and Arterra Wines Canada. They help collect some of the buds we do for our variety testing. BC Wine Grape Council, AAFC DIAP, and AIP initiatives, and of course the Canadian Grapevine Certification Network and this recent AAFC CAP initiative. And that's it.
Time for questions for both Pat and Karl.
Hey, my name is Nick. And I'm thinking about the flow damage on the exposure plan to cold weather. Is it accumulative or will it be reset if the temperature will up?
That's a good question. We haven't done that yet, and we want to. My guess is it probably reset, but we'll have to actually run the test and see. So.
Quick question for you.
Sure.
Karl, with that experiment where you held the temperature at -18, how did you guys decide on -18? Like, is that a typical temperature in your Arctic air mass that comes down? I know we have an interest in that sort of stuff here in Ontario as well, because when the polar vortexes, come down, we get those prolonged temperatures. But I'm just curious why -18.
Well, we mostly chose it because we had an idea where the bud hardiness was when we collected those canes, and so I chose tried to be about 4 degrees less hardy than the buds. So the buds on average were about -22 for bud hardiness. So I kind of picked -18 as the freezer temperature. Some of the runs, like later on in the spring, I chose -17 sometimes.
Karl, along the same lines, that same experiment, did you try that at different stages of dormancy or just maximum hardiness?
All stages. And we did it over 2 years, and we ran it several times. And it was during acclimation, maximum dormancy, and deacclimation.
Sorry, I have one for. Hey, so one of the tests you guys did was I think the pruning mass after you prune. And I see that after the period of 3 times, there is no significant difference.
Right.
But I'm totally could be wrong here, but I discovered that Agri-Food actually affect the health and the longevity of the vine. And here we see that the protein mass, which stands for the bigger of the vine, is not increasing significantly. So that we like somewhat contradict to the fact that should affect the maybe.
Especially since we're seeing compromised canopy performance and sugar, you expect over years.
Exactly.
Less and less bigger, and in that period, we didn't see accumulation. Well, first of all, we didn't see a response at all, which there are a few things that surprised us. And in that experiment with that variety, we didn't see that in that site. So that doesn't mean it's there.
Maybe in the long term, it will show up.
Right. It could show up later, you can see it slowly, or it could be happening when there is stunted growth. And other people reported reduced fruit set, like looser clusters, so, you know, it could be impacting at that time. But in this experiment, we didn't see that. We were sort of surprised. We didn't find some of the classic things people reported.
There's another, also want to add that a little bit. That block we're working in is a premium cab front block. So the crop load on that block is very, very low. So they're not really taxed year after year as much as they usually are.
Some other vineyards might be, yes, and really, that's a sad thing. It's one of the best cab blocks in the we will tell you where it is. So yeah, that's another thing, is they're very carefully managed to not be overcropped.
So Pat, does that, also from your research, in that really hot year, there was less of that impact from the leaf roll, but when you did that extrapolation experiment down to, cooler years, less growing degree days, larger differences. So of course, we're even lower here in Ontario in growing degree days than what you guys
are similar, very growing.
Would we expect then those differences could be even more?
From that 1 year's data, we saw that change. That was very surprised because commoners like us, Karl and I, who have a vineyard on the Narrometa Bench, we get our crop to 25, we're really happy, and so is the winery. So we don't have that luxury of hang time. So if we had some infection, we wouldn't be able to let them go. But we did the experiment again. So we had 2 years of just pairing and 2 years of this pairing. But that's the part that concerns me. And we're making purely leaf roll wine and purely clean, and nobody ever does that. And so that's another thing we could do. We've done that for the red blotch wines, to be careful on that because they're so much more terrible in their impacts on the sensory. And so having a look at that to be kind of imitating vineyard, they're harvesting everything and it's in the mix. But that was concerning to me that. More common kind of area, you started to see that separation.
So a few more years, you guys will come back and give us the update, or somebody will come back and give us the update on the red blotch.
Camping up there when you come. You might like some land up there when the climate change and all that. We're really happy to come here and talk to you, and also see our friends. So this is why we chose these two topics too. Thought they might be relevant.
Very
relevant. Together downer topics. But, yeah. Do you have a lot? I just want to ask you something about red blotch here. You probably don't have much of it here. It's like we have it's not a lot in BC, but it's nasty.
I think in general, with our preliminary information, I think red blotch is more here.
Pull them out. See, this whole thing, we have an area in the Okanagan that has a lot of leaf roll infection. And it's easy to say pull the vineyard out and replant, but then the neighbors don't, and then it just, we did that one experiment and moved in to a squeaky clean box the next year. So developing an industry-wide strategy to deal with this is not easy, and having this data showing the kinds of impacts they can expect, like timing and how to do this. If you've had Bogdanov here, so he's been working on that kind of strategic planning.
Yes, well, that'll be a good plug for the Tricks Minute for Lecture series this year, because we're having Mondale back to specifically talk about virus infections.
And typhoid Merriman Vineyards.
Yeah. Are there more questions? Sid, did you have a question?
I just wanted to add that, in the 2015 hot season, why you don't see much differences. One of the things that we think is the triggering point where the symptoms appear. When you have long hot seasons, the symptoms and the vines appear late in the season. Usually the symptoms appear when the temperature, after a long hot season, and generally night temperatures goes down, and that's the trigger point for the symptoms, especially in the respiratory pathogens. In the hot seasons, that won't happen. So you get your sugars accumulated, so that's why you don't see much differences. But 2014, I think 2016, regular years, you see symptoms early, so you see the differences in the quality.
I wasn't surprised that the really red leaves were fuller, but I mean, we just had a little bit of modeling. It's really big gap.
Well, please join me in thanking Karl and Pat for a little token of our appreciation.
Thank you.